Okay, welcome to another episode of Outside Our Walls, this podcast of Anchor Church Gilbert. We exist in this podcast realm, not because we're trying to get famous at all, not because we're trying to do anything like that. We at Anchor Church, maybe you're listening for the first time, we want to make sure that we're not caught in a bubble of our own wisdom. We like to actually look outside of the walls of our church because we recognize there's a lot of wisdom out there in evangelicalism. There's a lot of wisdom out there to be had, to grasp, to understand. And quite frankly, some of it are things that we don't, we might not otherwise know, or there's experts in other fields that we don't know. Sometimes we might even get things on here that that might just challenge us and push us because maybe we've never thought about it. We might actually initially disagree with it, not from today's guest. Today's guest is Vicki. Vicki, your last name is pronounced Diemert. Is that correct?
Yes.
I think I've said it probably maybe 7 different ways, so make sure I get it right. Vicki Diemert. And this is Vicki. This is your second time with us because I think we had you as a guest maybe smack in the middle of the pandemic, like 3 months ago. And so this is your second time on our podcast. We love to have you as a guest here.
Thank you.
I'm assuming that you're not exclusive though to our podcast. Have you been a guest on other podcasts as well? Or is it just,
Yeah. Funny you should mention that. I actually do get to be a guest. I've been a guest on this other podcast called Talking to Humans that Redemption Church Gateway does. And so
nice.
yes, I get to make my round as a podcast guest. It's fun.
That's like at this point you're a professional podcast guest. That's
what
you do.
Yeah.
Like part of your existence is professional podcast guesting.
Yes.
So that's good. So give us the name of that one more time. It's Talking to Humans.
Talking to Humans.
Okay.
It's Redemption Gateway.
We love Redemption Gateway. Luke did before we planted. Luke did a kind of a training for us, or at least to talk with us that I still use stuff from that. So just love the fact that you're there, that you're serving there. Vicki, if you don't know, Vicki is what's your official title? Director of
counseling director. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Director of counseling at Redemption Gateway. And we've known each other for a few years now, I think, and gone back and forth, had good conversations, encouraged one another, from Aaron and Tyler and myself, just being able to benefit from your wisdom and things like that. And people in the church, if you're part of Anchor Church, you've benefited from Vicki's wisdom, though you don't know it, I'm sure, because so much of how we view counseling and how we view trying to think through counseling comes from conversations with a few people, but Vicki would be one of the main ones. So though you've never met Vicki, or you wouldn't know that, you do know that. I'm actually right now, if you're watching this, we may or may not put this on YouTube, only because we're doing house projects, and Vicki, you can see I'm in my son's room. I have stuffed animals behind me. I think that there's like, I don't know, Simba maybe. Simba's behind me there. So, but we're trying to make do. It's a weird spot when you don't have an office. You're officing from home, and it is what it is. But grateful to have you. Thanks for jumping on again.
Yeah, thank you.
I thought what we would do today is talk a little bit about just some things that I think maybe we oversimplify. That might be a good way to say it. We oversimplify in the Christian world, especially when it comes to helping others, when it comes to being wronged or wronging others, or how to process through things like abuse, hurt, pain, especially when it comes from Christian to Christian, person to person. And I think we've had some of these conversations in the past, and I thought it would be helpful to bring in the church to some of these conversations, because I don't know if you know this, Vicki, you may or may not know this, but the church can be a messy place. I don't know if are you aware of that, or is that?
Yeah, a little bit. I've kind of observed that a tiny bit.
Yeah. The church can be a place where there is opportunities,
yes,
to be hurt, and actually opportunities to hurt others. And I think how we live that out sometimes in the weeks after, months after, can actually either be healing or more hurtful. And part of that, I think, comes from oversimplifying or even super spiritualizing certain things. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I would say, usually the conversation comes back to intentions, because like
Mm.
people are genuinely, truly trying to help, and they genuinely do care, and they genuinely know that the gospel has something to do with this and speaks into it.
Yeah.
And so it's coming from this place, but sometimes how we actually do it and how that plays out ends up not being helpful or actually
Yeah.
hurtful. And so kind of just affirming that yeah, we can have good intentions and be wanting to help, in that
Mm.
we actually end up doing the opposite.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for mentioning that, because I think that is true. I think a lot of people try to find, or maybe they've heard helpful things, helpful
Yes.
phrases, helpful, something. We were just joking before you got on here, like, someone's expressing um, pain over something,
Yeah.
and we can throw out, well, God works all things for good, which is true. I mean, that is true. That's a biblical concept. When someone's in the midst of grief and lament, it might not be the most helpful thing to say. So we're not going to talk about that. But if you listen to Talking with Humans, I think you're actually guys talking about that in a
Yeah. Yeah.
series, correct?
Discouraging encouragement is the name
Yeah,
of the thread.
discouraging encouragement, which I think is good. Um, so the first one I think that I just thought we could talk about a little bit in dialogue with is the idea of forgiveness, extending it, um, hearing somebody ask for it, how we respond to it. In sometimes our responses aren't great when someone says we've hurt them or things like that. And I actually had this, Duke Kwan, who's he just put this on. I think he's a pastor on the East Coast. He said how to apologize, and he gave these bullet points.
Mm.
He said express sorrow would be one, so I'm sorry. Own guilt, meaning I was wrong. Name specific wrongs, so I did X. Name the impact, I hurt you. Don't include ifs, so don't say things like sorry if I. Don't blame, shift, or defend, but you don't do that. No passive voice. Sorry that you were offended, and then make amends. What can I do? Which I think are really it's a really helpful category. Don't you find that a lot of times forgiveness is almost like what would we call it? It's like um, almost like a blame shifting. Like, oh, well, if you took what I said that way, I'm sorry that you did that.
Yeah.
Which is actually putting it on the other person, so we can think about forgiveness, but what is forgiveness and what isn't forgiveness? And maybe any thoughts on what Duke Kwan here said too. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think, what if we couldn't say the word forgive? What would we say instead? And I think even forgiveness, this foundational thing of our faith, is gets used flippantly, or we oversimplify it. Like, if you just forgive, you won't be, you won't be, right? Like it becomes, it's not as simple as that. But if we couldn't say the word forgive, what would we say instead? Um, yeah,
Hmm.
will you absorb the cost of my debt and not ask me to repay you for the harm that I've
Hmm.
caused? Or right, like that actually kind of changes the,
Hmm.
like, what am I actually asking?
Yeah.
um
What
and
are people
but
asking sometimes?
how function gets used is, I want it to be done. Like, I just let's move on. And it functionally gets used as sweeping something under the rug. And it actually it's functionally like accusation, like you didn't forgive, you need to forgive, you just need to. And so there's this functional, like, that's kind of the placing the responsibility of my behavior on you. Now I hurt you, but now you need to do this. And I think that actually shows we don't understand forgiveness. Like, we feel like we're entitled to it, and because I feel entitled to it, now I can accuse you of not releasing me of a debt. Like, we would never do that with a bank. Like if
Hmm.
I took or if I borrowed money from you or from the bank and couldn't pay it back, like, I wouldn't go and be like, you need to forgive me of this debt. You need to, like, not ask me to pay it back. And now
Yeah.
you're guilty because you didn't. you're asking me to pay it back.
Yeah.
Like we just wouldn't do that, but we'll do that to other people.
Mm. And there's
Um,
almost like because there's a social contract. Well, there's a biblical contract and a human to
mhm,
human contract where we understand wrongs and sin and
yeah,
offenses and yeah, to expect, I mean, even to the point of something that you just said, where we can even think about it from the standpoint of, I'm owed something. I'm fine to forgive you, but like that but is
yeah,
what causes us to have issues. Like
mhm,
hey, I'm okay to forgive you, but you also must do X,
yeah,
Y, and Z.
yeah.
It's like a fairness. Like, what is that?
It becomes a transactional thing, right? Like I'm going to either one say you have to forgive me because I'm entitled to it, or like, okay, fine, I will forgive you, but now you have to do this. And yeah, I think fairness, and I think it's because I don't want to be the only one guilty, right? Like
Right.
I want to make sure that like my or my side is also validated, acknowledged. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it's
What?
a
Yeah. I don't want to be the lone person standing up here that everybody's shooting at. So
yeah.
let's bring somebody else up here so they can get shot too.
Yeah.
Like, let's
I
make
want
sure
you to be
somebody
guilty
else.
too.
Yeah. 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 Let's just make sure that this is like a equal opportunity. I don't want to be, which is human
Yeah,
nature. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
it's sin at work, isn't it? It's a
yeah,
pride, selfishness. Like, let's make sure we get this. Um, what would be an example? Let's say you have a mother-daughter relationship, for example, or father-son. It doesn't matter. Like parent to child, and the mom gets really angry. I'm sure this never happens. But the mom gets really never. But the mom gets really angry at the child for something, or the dad gets really angry. Um, you go to your son or daughter. What's that? I mean, how do you should we think through that from a forgiveness
yeah,
standpoint?
yeah. This is the default. The sinful default would be like, you made me mad. Like we'll put the responsibility of my anger and my emotions on the other person or on the child. Like if you didn't do that, um, I wouldn't be mad. So you're the cause of my anger. Versus being like, this is what came out of me. Um, and it actually is super hard and humbling to say what came out of me was not loving nor kind and it was hurtful to you. And so kind of going back to the points that your friend made, that is actually super duper hard to do. Like we can all be like, yes, that's good, but actually doing it and saying, I I chose to um, yell, and you were scared when I yelled. You didn't know what was going to happen, and you didn't feel heard. And I'm very sorry about that. And will you forgive me? Will you not hold it against me? Will you
Yeah.
absorb the cost and not hold it against me? And I am going to try to um, I don't want to be like that, and I don't want you to be afraid of me. And it's my responsibility to bring that. It shows me my need for Jesus is laid before me and you, and I need Jesus, and I need Him to transform me. I need the Spirit to transform me, so that the condition of my heart is sick, and so I want to work to change and not respond and express my anger in sinful ways like that. And I'm going to take ownership of that. That's not your responsibility.
Yeah. Because we always want to say, I mean, even as you're talking about being hard to do, our first inclination is to justify, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
to say, well, okay. And you know what? In some ways, I mean, in some ways we all get that, right? If somebody, um, you're trying to talk and somebody keeps interrupting you, your anger
Yeah.
level is going to continue to get up to the point where you're like, you might yell and get frustrated or hit slam your hand on the table or something like that. Please stop, let me, to come back and ask forgiveness. It almost feels like, well, the right thing to do is to say, hey, if you hadn't been interrupting me, I would not have gotten angry like that.
Yeah.
Right. So it's to actually blame shift that, which again, like I think from a human interaction standpoint, that is actually true, probably from the standpoint of,
Yes.
look,
Yeah.
there's a cause and effect. However,
Yeah.
what I'm taking responsibility for is not what that person did. I can't
Yeah.
control what that person did. I control what
Yes.
I did.
Yeah.
Um,
My response isn't dependent on you, what you do.
yeah. So let's take a couple of these that he mentions as being things not to do. So that idea of like, sorry if I, that phrase. Hey, sorry
Yeah.
if I, that if is a like conditional clause. Hey,
Yeah.
it's almost like, I actually don't think I did that, but if I
Yeah.
did it.
If I did, and the person actually said you did, well, if I did, like I'm putting, like there's a question mark. I don't know that it actually happened.
Yeah.
If it happened, and they're like, it did happen.
Yeah, right. And you might not remember it. This is where I think too, I mean, we try to put everything in our best, we win every argument that's in our own minds.
Mhm.
Because we're going
Mhm.
to look the best to ourselves. I think a lot of times we just make ourselves look really good. So if somebody comes to you, Vicki, and says, you really hurt me when you said this to me, and you don't remember it. Like you're like,
Yeah.
I don't really remember saying that. How would you respond to that? If someone said, there was, we were at coffee, you said this to me and it actually really hurt me. I want to let you know that. What would be an appropriate response so that you don't get the sorry if I
Yeah.
answer?
Yeah. I think, tell me more. I want to hear more. What was it about that? And this, and here's the thing. I am actually free to be wrong because of Jesus. Like Jesus is my defender and justifier. So I don't need to defend and justify myself. I can be wrong and I have the freedom to enter into that perspective. And I can agree with their experience, even if I disagree with their conclusion. And I don't have to make my conclusion known, right? But that's dying to self. But yeah, like tell me more. I want to hear. So that went really hurt you. But this is the battle within, is being like, I didn't say it, or I didn't
Right.
mean it. Like I know I said, but this was my intention. And so it's not that we don't ever get to voice that, but I think, wow, so the way you heard that was, however, I am really sorry. Like, um, I'm sorry because, and I probably even could say that wasn't my intention, but that's not what happened. So whether it was my intention or not, you were hurt, and and I don't want to hurt you. And so thank you for trusting me to come and tell me. That actually means a lot to me, that you wouldn't hold on to this, that you would trust me enough to come and let me know instead of letting it build. That's a grace and a mercy to me. And so thank you.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, and that is such an amazing, one thing that's just lingering, something you just said, even as you get to that, the gospel allows us to be wrong. The gospel's okay. It allows us to experience and hear about and think about our own sinfulness or how we hurt
Yes.
others. To actually accept that as like, I did that.
Yeah.
We don't want to be like that, but I did that. Talk to me about that a little bit more, because I think that's exactly right. The gospel actually frees us to see those things and accept them and recognize, oh yeah, I likely did that. Why does the gospel talk about that? Why does the gospel
Yeah.
free us that way?
Like and that's why Jesus came. That's why he died, because we are sinners. Like that's the condition of my heart. Um, I am left to myself. I am going to hurt other people. I am going to misunderstand. I am going to, and so when I have to defend myself, I actually don't need Jesus. I just need. There's all these reasons that justify me, and so if I'm defending myself, then his death on the cross is not relevant to my life.
Mm.
But if, and it is true, he died and my sins are paid for. And what glory does it give him? It gives him glory when I say, I am needy. My need is laid out before me and others in very specific ways.
Yeah.
I speak flippantly in ways that hurt and offend people. I minimize other people's pain. I build myself up and minimize you in the process. And so it's the condition of my heart. And sometimes I think we want to change the outward behavior, and be like, oh, we're okay because like now I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Versus being
Yeah.
like, I can change the outward behavior, but that doesn't fix the condition of my heart. Like I have to.
Right.
The problem is within me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
can't be the solution to the problem. I need, and so it constantly is driving us to the cross every
Mm.
day. Oh, I need Jesus.
Yeah.
But here's the thing is he doesn't just forgive, he also transforms. Like he's making us more and more and more into the image of Christ. And so it's not like he's like, okay, I just forgive you and that's the end. That's only half the story. He's transforming us also, and that's a great promise. Like I'm going to make you not just be not angry, but you're going to become a person of peace, right? More and more of the fruit of the Spirit will flow out of you.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and so
good.
there's this trajectory that we get to live under. But if I'm not going to confront something, it's not going to be, if I'm not going to look at things in reality, um, he's not going to force us. He's always inviting us, but he doesn't force us to see.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really helpful. That's good. I think it plays into the next one too, which is, I'll just do one more of these, but sorry if what I said offended you.
Yeah.
Which may be the best forgiveness juke that we all are tempted to do. I'm sorry if you were offended by what I said, or something like that, you know. It really places the ownership of it on the other person. Hey, if you're, I mean, it comes across this way. I know this is not the intention typically, but hey, if you're weak enough to take it that way, that's up to you. That's on you, you know,
Yeah.
like, but I mean, I guess I'll own it. Like if
Yeah.
you can't handle if you
Yeah.
can't handle true things,
Yeah.
or if you can't handle me, that's fine.
Yeah.
It just takes all of, if somebody's coming to you, Vicki, if I'm coming to you with hurt, you know, from something you've said to me, there's a vulnerability for me to even come and talk to you
Yes.
about it.
Yes.
And when you take that and you actually throw it back upon me,
Yes. Yeah.
it's hurtful.
Yeah. Because what you're saying when you come, like if you came to me, you're saying, I can be affected by the things that you say and do. Like, right, there's this vulnerability and this power, like I have the ability. And then if I minimize that and be like, well, if I said that, or you just misunderstood, versus me being like, well, maybe I didn't speak, I didn't speak clearly. I need to own that. That the way I said it or how I said it, I said it in such a way that wasn't helpful.
Hmm.
And there is, even though it sounds hard, there is freedom to be like, instead, if I offended you, to say, did I offend you? How? What was it about that was offensive?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
right? Like it becomes I can come underneath. I can come underneath and um,
Talk to me about that. We've used the phrase, and we've talked about this, but the difference between power over and power under.
yeah,
What talk to me about that, because I think that plays into this kind of thing. Like, how do I allow somebody else to be in an image bearer of the living God, to be valued,
yeah,
bringing an offense? You know, you could do that in a power over way
yeah,
or a power under way. Talk to me about that really fast.
yeah, yeah. I can say your experience doesn't matter. I'm going to use my power, my position, my authority over you, and meaning I'm going to determine and decide um, what is right and wrong and how you're seeing it or not seeing it. Versus power under would be like, I actually don't understand. There, I could be wrong, and I want to learn from you because what you have to say is valuable. It's needed for my growth, my sanctification, and for the kingdom to go forward. We need a variety of voices, and so I'm going to use my platform or whatever to make sure your voice, perspective, experience gets heard, considered, engaged with, versus silencing it. And that's what the if statement says, that I'm really going to silence your voice, and
Yeah.
that's power under instead of, or power over instead of coming under to be like, even if your voice is revealing something about my heart, right?
Yeah.
Like what that's hard. Like I don't want it. I
You're,
don't want that.
yeah, you're giving somebody's voice power to correct,
Yes.
to and that's really hard to do, but it's so important for a healthy Christian life. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so important to be a healthy Christian in marriage, in friendship, in parenting, as a teen, to your friends, to your parents, to I'm more convinced, Vicki, and I don't know what you think about this. This is totally off topic. This is what happens when we talk. But totally off topic. But I'm more convinced that the doctrine of the Imago Dei, so the
Yeah.
image of God, it is one of the most important doctrines
Yes.
for us to fully grasp and understand if we are going to actually treat people the way Jesus calls us to. Like that idea of when the scribes come to Jesus and say, "Hey, what are the commandments of the greatest ones?" Right? And he
Yeah.
says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." Both
Yeah.
of those issues, those laws, the categories Jesus gives, are rooted in the Imago Dei. It's the I love the
Yes.
Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength because He made
Yes.
me in His image, and I'm His. And I love my neighbor as myself, as an image bearer, because I want
Yes.
His image to be lifted up and born. So that deals
Yes.
with abortion, as we think
Yeah.
about from the womb to the tomb, abortion, racism,
Yes.
euthanasia, feeding the
Mm-hmm.
poor, being marginalized, power under, not power over, abuse. I mean, all of that
Yeah.
stuff, lying to one another, forgiving each other, all that stuff. It comes really from a root of understanding and living out the realities of the Imago Dei.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yes, he's transforming us, and we see him more. When we see Jesus and how he interacted with others, like the kingdom is being lived out in front of us. When we look at scripture and look at how Jesus interacted with people. And I'm thinking of Philippians 2, how have the mind of Christ. And what did he do? He left heaven, came down to be a servant, right, to come underneath. And then he said, have the mind of Christ, consider others better than yourselves. And so we get to go and I think about taking dominion as so much I have control, but that he's in me and through me. And so I get to live out his image and be a transformed and transforming presence with whoever I'm interacting with. I get to show the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, all of that. I get to value and see and seek out the image in other people,
Yeah.
and be blessed by that reflection to me.
Yeah. Man, that's good. I think that's good. I think that deals with, I mean, the forgiveness so that's really helpful. One more category on forgiveness. We've talked about this a little bit, and I don't even know how to necessarily phrase this question, but I think it's so incredibly important. I think we'll get there. we'll get there eventually, and it'll be clear. When somebody doesn't ask forgiveness, when they don't recognize the harmful effects of their words, their actions. So it could be let's just call it like an abusive marriage. When somebody doesn't recognize that, the one that is the victim or survivor of the abuse, there is a call in one sense to forgive as Jesus has forgiven. But in the other sense, and that's true, like full stop, like we are called to, we are called to in our hearts not grow in bitterness. Like there's sin categories that can creep in. We're called to not allow that to happen. But at the same time, there is something about, can I truly forgive somebody if they have not asked for forgiveness? So like, is there a difference between my heart attitude towards you, not being bitter, not growing in anger, I shouldn't say anger, not growing in wrathful, vindictive anger, but trying to take on the heart of Christ in that, with my hurt and my pain and all of those things, and yet also having a functional, proper understanding of forgiveness and justice and how they play into itself and how it plays off of each other. I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit. Any thoughts you have? Because I think justice and forgiveness go together.
Yes.
For forgiveness to fully be extended in an actual, like actualized, we can be reconciled together. We're not at enmity or something like that. I can't, whatever. Does that make sense? I know that sounds convoluted, but I hope it makes sense to you, and I hope it makes sense to people that are listening, because I want to make sure we get, and if you can clarify anything I just said to make it more clear, I would love for you to do that.
I think so. I think, there's just a lot to unpack there. And I think one thing is, I think the fear, especially in something like abuse, is if I forgive, somehow I'm going to become a doormat. And so, but we have the whole, like, okay, just forgive. And then the person keeps sinning against you and hurting you. And okay, I'm just called to keep forgiving and I become a doormat. But we have passages, it's the whole of scripture. So we have something like Matthew 18, where if your brother sins against you, go to them. Now bring somebody else, right? And so, and I think it's in Luke, it says, if he repents, forgive him. Like, yeah, Luke 17. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him. And if they repent, forgive them. And so, but yes, we still want to have this forgiving heart and attitude. And if somebody isn't repentant, the call isn't necessarily to just stay there and keep getting bulldozed over. Love might look like space. Love might look like boundaries. Like, love does also confront. I even think about, like, in the garden, when Adam and Eve ate of the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they had to leave the garden. And so one thing God did was create space. And for the purpose, the end game is that he will dwell with us for the purpose of reconciliation. Like Revelation, where believers we will dwell with him, but there's a purpose for the space. And so sometimes space is what is needed. And I can forgive you and there's still consequences. So I can forgive you and our relationship doesn't look the same. It doesn't equal that the pain is gone. It doesn't equal that trust has been rebuilt. It doesn't equal that, right? So something still might be different. And I think sometimes that's hard with forgiveness because we think, okay, you forgave me, all is well, it goes back to normal. Sometimes it's the case, but a person's not repentant. I can forgive you and create space.
Yeah, it's Jesus telling the disciples, be innocent as doves and wise as serpents. Like, be smart. So if somebody is a chronic, like, if somebody, let's just say somebody uses me for their own benefit, there maybe there's somebody who's coming, they've befriended me, but it's only to step on me to get higher, which happens all the time, right? It's you're using your friendships. I might go to that person and say, listen, that was really hurtful. They might say, hey, I recognize that. Forgive me for that. I did not want to do that. Great. Thank you. And then they do it again. And you might go to them and say, this is what the old adage is, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, or whatever. No, it's the flip side, whatever it is, shame on you, shame on me. But I think there's a reality there where we think, I can forgive you. In my heart, I can say, I don't hold you bitterness. Jesus forgave me. I want to make sure I'm forgiving you. But I'm never really going to be friends with you again. I just don't, like, there's just too much, we'll be cordial, but I need some distance, some space, what you just said. I just need to recognize this is not a healthy relationship for me. And, for right now, at least, and I need to give some space.
Yeah. I think that's right. There are just consequences. And I think, like, even if we take it to money, like, if you borrowed money from me and you didn't pay me back, and I was like, the contract was you're going to pay me back, but you didn't. You're like, I can't. But like I forgive you. Like, you don't have to pay that debt back. But that also doesn't mean the next time you come and ask me for money that I have to pay, I'm going to give you more. Right? Like that would actually now like there's a little bit, there could be foolishness in that. And that doesn't mean I didn't forgive the first debt. Like, I really did truly forgive the first debt. Like, I'm not going to ask you to repay, but that doesn't equal, like, wisdom would just be like, I'm going to be a steward of my money. I'm going to be a steward of my time. I'm going to be a steward of myself. And I actually don't know that it would be loving to continue to give you money and continue to let you, right? Like, there's just wisdom there. And I think we can transfer some of those principles to relationships.
Yeah, that's good.
Now, if there's true repentance in the person, like I think forgiveness does allow space to be like, is the person really, like, I am seeing change, like I am, right? And we can slowly work back towards reconciliation. But sometimes maybe in an abusive relationship, there's just so much pain that has actually happened that, and you think about trauma and trauma responses, that it just, the person can forgive and it just won't on the side of heaven be a safe place for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah. I think that's good. I think it's good to recognize that.
yeah. And it doesn't equal
And
they didn't forgive.
no, it's true. And also it's what's so sweet about, there's nothing more godly or less godly about being in either situation. If you're a victim of abuse, in a marriage, and you choose to stay with somebody, that's a miracle of God's amazing grace and kindness, and God can use that, work in that, change, continue to work for change, especially when the other person, when the abuser is maybe, it has just had a radical heart change. Not perfection, because nobody's perfect. There's still going to be sin tendencies in all of our hearts. You just get to a spot where you can more healthfully, especially in like things like emotional abuse, like someone that doesn't, where you can more healthily work through issues like a normal couple would, where lack of communication, sin, whatever, but you're able to work through it in a healthy way. I think we can think that's more godly than somebody that says, I just can't, or like one person's stronger than the other, or it's more preferable, Jesus is more pleased with the person that stays. And I just think that that's not right. There's grace in both relationships when it comes to an issue of marriage. Same thing with somebody that has an adulterous affair. There's somebody that might commit adultery in a marriage, and the married couple, the spouse that was was a victim of that, I guess, or I don't know how we would call that, but that's on the outside, that's been offended, might say, I'm going to stick together, I want to stay this. Another one might say, I can't. And one's not more godly than the other one, correct?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think we too quickly judge that, and somehow we've decided that this is more godly, and all that does is that just brings shame unnecessarily, like shame on, like I chose the less godly route, when in reality what God is doing is he's still rescued both people. One rescue looked like maybe a changed heart or repentant spouse, and one looked like I'm taking you out of an unhealthy situation. And sometimes I think we elevate marriage above the people in the marriage. And so it's actually it could be a shallow win. Like, okay, the person doesn't, they stay, and like, okay, they stayed married, but they become less and less of a person. They become more and more dehumanized, and they just become a shell of a person. So essentially it's dad. What speak to them is, you're not important, you're not valued, but they stayed married. And so we'll be like, when the marriage itself isn't representing or reflecting God and his character. If marriage is a reflection of God and Christ in the church, that's not.
How is that? Yeah.
God, how is that honoring God? That's not reflecting God at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I think that's where, I think we all understand this that listen to this, but there's reasons for divorce that God gives, and in those there are sweet stories of reconciliation. There are sweet stories of separation that lead to a break and a divorce in the marriage. But God is at work in both of those, and he's doing things in both of those to redeem, to change, to sanctify, to give him, glorify his name. And all of that is, we just can't see one as different than the other one, I think that's helpful. Okay. Took way too long on that. So let me just hit one more category here. And that's the category of anger. And we've talked about this a little bit, even as we're talking about forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time, you mentioned something where there was, like that idea of when someone's wronged, like grievously wronged, again, like if you think of abuse or something like that, and the temptation, I think, in Christian circles can be to, especially people that have grown up in the church or had teaching and training on the sovereignty of God, or something like that, we can think, I'm angry, and then automatically think, I shouldn't be angry, that's not right. From a biblical perspective, I need to not be angry because that's a sin. And
Yeah.
so we have this inner dialogue and this inner turmoil. I remember something you said one time was, actually, when you think about how you people have been wronged in an abusive marriage, or again, like we're talking about marriage in particular here, but or adultery or something like that, anger is actually a kind of an appropriate emotion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an appropriate response.
Yeah.
It's because of injustice, because of being sinned against, just the evil of the sin itself. Like anger, that is not necessarily, sometimes it is when it leads to bitterness and retribution.
Yeah.
And all of those roads of, you read the Conte Monte Cristo, which is my favorite book of all time, but it's dealing with revenge, like the idea of revenge. I got to get back at everybody. That clearly crosses a line. But the idea of anger, like, I'm actually angry right now that you've done this to me.
Yeah.
That's not always sinful, is it?
Right. Yeah. God is angry at injustice. And so sometimes, like, if I can't be angry, then it's talking about being an image bearer. Our anger at injustice is reflecting the character of God. Thank you. I'm thankful that we have a God that is against injustices. He is a just and perfect God. And so part of that is anger at injustice. And so often I think we can start evaluating the emotion, like anger in itself is bad, that there is something that is appropriate. So I try to not be affected in the appropriate way, and I think that's bad. Versus being like, what is this actually revealing? What is this about?
Why is it that that's so much of our first response sometimes? And again, maybe there's a really good heart check there. Maybe it's a good heart check response, but I think it can also lead us to not process hurt properly, right?
Yeah. So if you just have to, this is what we'll do, is we'll be like, faith looks like not being affected, not being angry. And I just don't think that's true at all. Like, I can be angry. Like, no, I don't want to express my anger sinfully. Like, it's, to go slander somebody or hurt somebody or whatever. Like, that's not helpful. Like, we're probably pretty quick to tip over to sinful, but that's not to say that there's not righteous indignation, like righteous anger at oppression or abuse or mistreatment or like lying. The other day my daughter was, she had dropped her wallet in the parking lot and realized it and turned around and somebody had stopped their car, picked up the wallet, and she said, "Oh, that's my wallet." And he looked at her, got in his car, and drove away. Oh, and so there's this like experienced evil, like there's this intentional like righteous indignation that was not okay. And but sometimes I think we become like the judges of the emotion versus what is the injustice that happened with any emotion, especially like since we're talking about anger, something that we love or value is in play. And so with anger, there's an injustice to it or something is being withheld. And what's being withheld could be good or bad, but I think that's the deeper conversation and helping somebody process their anger versus just don't be affected.
Yeah.
I can't just turn that off. Like, okay, well now I'm just not now somehow my faith is being indicted.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
We're emotional. God made us emotional people. That's part of it's part of why we are image bearers of his. Like we reflect emotions and we speak and we communicate, through words and all of these things. Like God made us that way.
Yeah.
And and sin, when it came into the world, flipped it so that it can actually be, is retributive a word? What would be the word? What would be that word? It can be like find retribution or something like that.
Yeah.
Or it's like we harm each other with our emotions, or we try to be, but we can also have emotions be, it's part of the sweetness of what we are. It's why we have hurt. And, that's part of our image bearerness, dealing with those things emotionally. So that's good. Speaking of hurt, how should we view trauma as Christians? Like, how should we think through that? Because when we think about, we're just talking about abuse, anger, forgiveness, all of that, when it gets deep enough and hurtful enough and painful enough, there can be responses that are like they can be traumatic, right? Traumatic things. There you're talking about like definitely about abuse and things like that. You have trauma responses. I think sometimes in Christendom, we can say, oh, trauma is not a thing. Like God's, you have everything you need for life and godliness in the scriptures. So just go to it and it's good. And we kind of ignore the fact that, well, our brains are organs that we don't understand. And there's lots of things that happen there chemically, that, wires can get crossed because of how you've been treated and things like that. I think that's been pretty well proven over psychological study. How should we think about trauma as Christians?
Yeah, I think defining it, it's an experience. There's this disturbing experience, something has happened that has caused great pain or fear. It could even be a car accident, right? And so now there's this physiological experience, and that we're embodied souls, and so our body experiences something. So let's just say it was a car accident. Maybe somebody's T-boned right on the right side or something, and so whenever they're going through an intersection, they kind of flinch, because there's this experience that now that has been imprinted into them. And so sometimes those responses don't make sense, right? Or thinking about like a child growing up in an abusive situation, maybe there was always something like burnt toast. And so the smell of burnt toast is associated with anger or getting beat up, but that's not something that's conscious in their mind. So, right, so now they're an adult and somebody burns toast and they just start crying, or and it doesn't make sense to us. And so I think as there is a book, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And it just talks about like our bodies. Like, here's the thing is we can't talk ourselves out of an experience, and so we experience something, but then you try to like rationally talk ourselves out of it, or people try to talk other people out of it, and we try to make some sense of something that doesn't make sense, versus tell me more. Or we say somebody's overreacting without investigating more. I just decided that you're overreacting. Your response doesn't make sense. Instead of saying like what happened, like you're being affected and it seems like your anger or whatever this response is.
That could just be a really big red flag. Like, I think that's where you might say, oh man, there's a red flag here. This doesn't make any sense. Like, this response is so much over and above what it should have been given whatever happened. The comment, the sound that went off, the smell that just hit, like, what is going on? It could be just a red flag to say, hey, this person, my friend here, might need some help, or like, I wonder if there's something else going on.
Instead of giving them a judgment or an assessment. And that was like bad, because that's just going to add to it, versus tell me more, help me understand. I'd love to walk through this. I think and my starting point is I think I'm missing something. And often what happens is people who have experienced trauma, especially abuse, it's not just the experience, but a false narrative or lie has been spoken into them. maybe it is about their worth and their value, or that they're dumb, or they don't know. And so they actually end up questioning themselves, or it could be about God. I was talking to a lady who said she grew up in an abusive situation, and people, as an adult, people told her God was with you, trying to help her and comfort her. But you know what they actually told her was like, what good is it if God was with me and he didn't do anything? So now I serve a God that was actually complicit in the abuse.
You didn't care.
He didn't care. Great, he was with me. He didn't stop it. He didn't intervene. He didn't protect. And so now she's living out of this narrative, and so she's become this like, I need to help and speak, and which is, yes, which is true, speak on behalf and help protect others, but it's I don't believe God will. And so she doesn't need judgment. She needs compassion. She needs somebody to sit and walk with her and be like, because it is true, God was with her, but people just left it there, and they didn't.
Yeah.
So it actually ended up confusing her, and now she's living out of this false narrative.
What would you say to somebody like that? So like, if somebody says that, if someone says, if God loved me, he would not have even let that happen. Like, he's okay, so God's with me, but what does that mean? How would you help somebody that's in that situation?
Yeah, I think the temptation is to give doctrine and knowledge. Right here, you just need more understanding of who God is.
Romans, 8:28. Let's just make sure we hit that again.
Yeah, right. Let's take this one verse out of its context.
For sure.
Let's use it to help you understand. And then what functionally could happen is they start feeling worse and start, like, once again, I feel like my faith is being indicted, versus asking questions. And like with this particular person, it was really interesting. Out of the blue, she's like, I hate the book of Job. I hate Job. I was like, oh, like, tell me more about that. It's like, all this horrible stuff happened to Job, and at the end, God just got to be like, well, I'm God, so don't question me. God is God, don't question me. And so again, the temptation is to be like, oh, well, you're misunderstanding. Like, let me actually, and instead of being like, you know what, let's go and let's ask. Let's pray. But God, where were you? It feels like you really have abandoned it. Like, and I get to have the opportunity to give voice. It feels helpless, right? Because let's leave room for the Spirit to work. But I think it's not going to be a conversation that gets tied up in a bow in one sitting.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes we feel like we have to, like, I have to correct this thinking right now, and versus being like, tell me more. Let's walk through that. Like, and sometimes even having them answer, like, that's interesting. Tell me, if he was with you, where would he have been? Like, what was he doing? Right? Like, let's talk through this. I don't have to fix your thinking.
Yeah, that's good. I think
it's hard though.
It's really hard, and those are really hard questions.
Yeah.
Because sin is just grievous, and it just destroys everything. I think, I just have a couple thoughts. That Job question stuff. We're just talking through Esther this past. We just started Esther, and one of the things we talked about on Sunday was in Esther chapters 1 and 2. You have the king who's living a lavish lifestyle. He's abusive to the queen. He doesn't, they're anti-Semitic. They don't like the Jewish people. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on there, right? But he looks like he's the blessed person, because he's got everything he needs. Like, this is great. And you could ask, why is that the case? Why does God allow that? You get to Mordecai and Esther, and they were taken. It says they were carried away from Jerusalem. They were carried away from their homeland. The Babylonians carried them away, and then Esther gets carried away into the harem. And she's obviously in a sexually vulnerable position. There's a lot of stuff that is happening. You could ask, Lord, why is the pagan king being blessed, and why are your people being oppressed? And I asked the question, why is it that, this is all ending up with saving the Israelites, right? Saving the Jewish people. The whole book of Esther, it's about saving them. But he wouldn't have even had to do that if he didn't allow them to be taken from
Right.
Jerusalem in the first place. Like,
Right.
so you could
Why
ask the
didn't he
question,
stop it
why?
back there? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, why did you even let them go? You wouldn't even needed to do all this
Yeah.
stuff, right? It's a lot of why
Yeah.
questions. And we said, asking God why is an act of faith, not unbelief. Like
Yeah.
that idea of asking the question, God, why are you allowing this to happen, is actually an act of me believing that God
Yeah.
knows,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to ask him to answer that question. This is what you just said in terms of that person asking about Job. It's great because at least they're saying,
They're
this doesn't make
asking.
any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saying, I don't understand and I don't get it. And this is the way that I'm thinking, and help. I don't know. And let's engage with God. We have a God that hears and a God that speaks. And we have the Spirit in us. Um, and I love the book of Esther because it's interesting. God isn't mentioned one time in
Yeah.
Esther.
Not one
And
time.
and yet we see his fingerprint and his orchestration throughout. Like you see, like, oh,
Throughout.
that's the coincidence. Like,
Yeah, it's all the
right, like,
coincidental things, huh? Oh,
yeah,
Mordecai just happens to be at the gate when they're talking
yeah,
about the plot for
yeah,
the king.
yeah.
Yeah,
And the king just happens to read the chronicles of this event, right?
in the
Like
middle of the night because
in
he
the middle of the
happens to
night.
not be able to
He's
sleep
like,
the night before they're going to kill all the Jewish
yeah,
people. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right.
Like I'll just, and I'm thinking about Job though, and in the beginning, it just is like a helping perspective, the Job's helpers. A couple of things. One, they saw him from afar and they saw his suffering and they saw how bad it was, and they sat and they wept with him for 7 days and 7 nights.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody spoke because they saw how deep his suffering was. And just that we can affirm the goodness there, that there was, like, weep with those who weep. And sometimes the weeping is the thing that brings comfort. There's not even any words that can do justice to the situation. Um, but the friends get this bad rap because, and I'm thinking in Job 5:27, they say, we got together, we examined it, this is right, so apply it to your life.
Hmm.
And really they were wrong.
Yeah, wasn't helpful.
Right. It
Yeah,
wasn't helpful. At the end, God was like, maybe ask Job to pray for you, right? Like ask the one that has
yeah,
suffered to pray for you. And I think like it's just a reminder, like, for me to hold my assessments and what I think is right and wrong loosely, and go to God and be like, God, what do you have to say? Like
yeah,
what I'm going to assume that I'm missing something because I'm not all knowing, and there's things that you're saying and doing, and I want to be slow to say apply this to your life because
yeah,
I don't know. I would rather let's talk through it and pray than it
yeah. Absolutely, that's good.
thing. Um, but
That's all. Yeah, that's really good. I think I don't know. I haven't thought this one the whole way through. So if this is wrong, everybody, I'm just giving this as one caveat. But I think God cares. He cares equally about our moment by moment existence. He cares about that exactly the same way as he cares about our 10 years from now. However, the 10-year plan sometimes is, to get to the 10-year plan, the moment by moment as we walk through it could be painful and harmful and hurtful. Not because he's calling us to that, but there's an allowance. So like even if you think about the Babylonian captivity, you're like, well, there's how many years? I mean, they went through the Babylonian kings,
yeah,
the Persian takeover from Cyrus to Darius to the kings there, to even get to Xerxes before he enacted anything with Esther. Like Esther didn't have it for a long time. Jesus, there was nothing for 400 years between the last prophet and the coming
yeah,
of Christ, to where
yeah,
like our country is only 250 years
yeah,
old.
yeah,
So how long ago does 1776 feel? You're like that. I mean, it feels like forever ago. There's not. I don't know. I can't even relate to that. And yet the prophets was 400 years, 150 years longer than when our country was founded. And if I'm doing my math correctly, maybe
hmm
does that sound
I
right?
think,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's good.
it's 400
Yeah,
years.
I think it's right. So, but the 400 years. I mean, just think about that. At what point do people say, "God forgot about me"?
Yeah,
Like which generation goes, God is,
Yeah.
God is not. But there is an overarching plan, not for the lives of people. They are for the lives of people, but
Yeah.
it's for the human history. It's for the
Yes.
church. It's for the people of God. It's for his children. It's to recognize at the perfect, proper time, he will act mightily to do certain things specifically. He hasn't forgotten about the people in year 200 that he hasn't spoken through a prophet at
Right.
all. He's
Right.
with them, but there is a larger story arc that he is
Yeah.
constantly working in. And that can be hard for us to understand. Things that I'm going through today or last year or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, or people that have gone through it were, dealing with abuse as a child or something like that are just struggling with life. God was with them in that, and he's working purposes in that, and he's on the move in those things. It is done. I mean, it is painful. Um, but there's not, and there's something that he's accomplishing
Yeah.
20 years ago today in me, that maybe my trust is deeper. Maybe I'm just wrestling through Job right now because I
Yeah.
just need to understand
Yeah.
who God is.
Yeah.
There's a sweetness to that, I think, that it's hard to understand. We need to grasp. I've been wrestling through that. Just like, man, how do I think about moments and years
Yeah.
and God's actions, activities in both?
And his timing, like he doesn't live on the timeline like we live on it. And
Mm-hmm.
I even think about Job, like there's like 30 plus chapters of them just wrestling and talking, right? Like
Yeah.
that's there it is, right? We're talking, they were having a conversation about God and what God is doing and
Yeah.
trying to understand it. And then but even that 400 years where it was silence. What's fascinating is, well, I think in the waiting is spiritual because it reveals um, the affections of our hearts and the things vying for the affections of our hearts. But in the 400 years, the Gospels start with the genealogy.
Yeah.
So
Right.
all this time, it's, they've been talking about it
Yeah.
because now they right
It's
they've
been,
been keeping track for they're still waiting for the Messiah.
yep, for sure.
Right. And so here's 400 years where like yeah like you start with the genealogy and
Mm.
and it's here, it's finally come.
Yeah, God's plans are found in specifics.
Yes.
His March plans, like, because those are specific things. Carrying through that genealogy from Judah all the
Yes.
way through
Yeah.
is important. Yeah,
Yeah, so for 400 years they still knew about Judah, right? And then
yeah. There's
right.
there's a Messiah coming. I think. I
Yeah.
just, man, it would have been so hard. I mean, how many generations do you go through in 400 years? I mean, five. I mean, 4 or 5. I'm assuming somewhere. I mean, more. I don't know, but you're
Yeah.
going through a bunch of them to where at some point there's been no prophet. God has not
Yeah.
spoken.
Yes.
Um, when He's been speaking forever. I mean, like, to the people. Um, I get those things are fascinating to me because it just helps you try to reveal who God is. I was just reading through Genesis um, 48. Well, no, I was actually earlier than that, but all the way to the life of Joseph, and
Mm.
I think it's in chapter 46. I could be wrong. I think there's 50 chapters in Genesis. I think it's chapter 46, which I think is one of the most astounding chapters in the Bible, when Joseph tells his brothers who have seriously wronged him, like threw him into a pit, we're going to kill him, sold him into the Egyptians for slavery. And we find out later that he pleaded with them. They heard him pleading with them to not do it. Please stop doing this. And they did it anyway. And then he's in prison and all this bad stuff happens to him. And yet when they come to him, he says, what you meant for evil,
Yeah.
God meant for good. Like, I don't want you to be concerned about this because you did not send me to Egypt.
That's
God
right.
sent me to Egypt. God did this. He prepared a place and he prepared a way. Now, 15 years in his 15th year in prison, on a Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. when he's got to do it over again, he had to have fought for faith because he is getting to the place where
Yeah.
he's like, there's got to be what is going on here? And he sees God's
Yeah.
hand in it. It's an astounding chapter of the Bible because it
And
is.
by the
Go
yeah,
ahead.
by the time he he sees what God is doing, like how much waiting did he have to do? Like even from the dreams that he had when he was like what 17 to like when they
Yeah.
came to fruition,
Yeah.
was however many years. But even waiting in prison where you have the two people, the baker and the cupbearer,
Yeah.
and they leave and he gets forgotten. But
And forgotten again. Yeah.
yeah, forgotten again. And it's interesting because God blessed everything that he did. So that means he was doing something.
Right.
Right. Like he wasn't
Yes.
just sitting in prison. Like he was obviously doing something that God could bless in prison,
Right.
where he became like the head of the prison.
Yeah.
God. And I think it's interesting, like when we think of scripture just in the divine author through the human authors, right? What is it? However, 60 plus books written over 1,500
66.
years with
Mm-hmm.
66, yeah, with over 40 plus authors, and it's telling the same cohesive story, and
Yep.
that's just it blows your mind. And I even think
Yeah.
about Joseph in prison. It's interesting that who's with him was a cupbearer and a baker, and it just brings us to it's echoes of the sacrament, right? Like the bread and the wine,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm.
and then you have 3 days, and
Yeah.
it's just there's certainly like this is a foreshadow of what's to come. But like, how could that author know the
All of
cross,
that. Yeah.
right? And you're just like, whoa, like God
Whoa,
is
what's
just doing
happening?
so much more than we can even grasp, and we're not going to know the full story, right? Like we're just kind of our
Yeah.
finite minds, I don't think.
No, we can't grasp it
Whenever we
all.
see something new, we're like,
Yeah.
I've read this.
Yeah.
And
That's good. There's a book called Echoes of Exodus. I don't know if you've read that book.
yes, yeah, you recommended it to me and I read it. It's one of your
It's so
recommendations to
good.
me.
I just, I feel like you read Joseph, and Joseph really is there's an Exodus story there in some ways. There's an Exodus story all the way throughout the Old Testament. That idea of Moses preparing the way and giving it over to Joshua, and Elijah preparing the way for Elisha, and
Yeah.
like so many things that just continually point to, even with the judges and all of like the scriptures, it points to, and the gospel itself is an Exodus story. The cross, John the Baptist prepares the way for Jesus, and how that he goes in the wilderness. Jesus goes in the wilderness for 40 days to be. There's just so many things there that just point to a cohesive story that I just think is amazing, and it causes you to want to dig back into the scriptures, because I think it helps us to understand who God is and to press in.
Can you
So,
imagine if we tried to do that today? Like, let's
there's no
try to
way.
have 40 authors write the same story, different aspects of the same story.
Yeah, not going to work.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
it just wouldn't happen. Like it wouldn't, yeah, it makes,
yeah.
we really do see God's hand and sovereignty in it.
Yeah, for sure.
Even, I'm thinking like Genesis 2 talks about the tree of life. In Revelation 22, we have the tree of
Yeah.
life again. And this bookend of, that's just interesting. That's
Yeah.
just fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
We're back in the garden. Well, Genesis,
we're back in the garden.
Genesis is made, but you're in the garden in the beginning, and the whole Bible story arc is to get the people of God back into the garden. And
Back to the garden.
they were removed from the garden because of sin, and God's been working for thousands of years, however long we're going to be, until we're back in the garden with him. I mean, that whole last chapter of the tree of life, and we're like, that's the story of the Bible, from garden to garden.
Yes.
From
Yep.
perfect communion with God to perfect communion with God. And we take this trajectory, this Jacob-like trajectory of leaving the promised land, going through all of our stuff where we connive, we do all the things we're going to do, we don't like, we run away from God. God finds us, we wrestle with him, he hurts our hips so we can't do anything.
Yes,
we trust him,
right.
we give ourselves over to him, and we bring, Jacob comes back into the promised land of Canaan. And that's our story. Like, that's our story of, as Christians, people that needed to be caught by God, wrestled to the ground, changed in a moment, so that we can find ourselves back in communion with him. I just think that we got to get that. We have to understand that it's the beauty of the beauty of the scriptures.
The whole end game is that he dwells with his people again. And he's even telling us along the way, like, look at the tabernacles. the garden, right? And the Holy of Holies, the outer court, the Holy of Holies, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he's like, this is
Yeah.
where we're going and bringing you back. But how many years, right? From garden to garden. And
Yeah. A lot of years,
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
years, a lot of heartache, a lot of difficulty, trials, forced to trust him. I remember Charles Spurgeon one time said, I've learned, there's a few things that I've learned about God from the good times in life, but the things that I've learned through my hardships and struggles and trials are incalculable. Like I
Wow.
can't tell you how much I've learned to trust the Lord and learn about his character in all the difficulties, because it causes me to I just depend upon him. I need him in those moments, and he proved himself faithful over and over again. And I think we, as we think about just life being hard, and like we're talking about trauma, forgiveness, dealing with our anger, just frustration, relational strife, all of that, even worse things, cancer diagnoses, the world that we live in, all of the sin that happens, racism, abortion, all of that stuff that we might personally come into contact with and grieve over. We look at that, and I think it should cause us to either say, I'm done with the Lord, which I think, the parable of the sower would say some will do that, or to say, I need you more than ever. And I think that is, God wants us there. I need you, and I'm going to trust you in it. So I think that's all really good.
And I think for me, it produces a longing. Like I long for, right? Like, one day there will be no more tears, and one day every nation, tribe, and tongue, right? Like
Yeah.
racism will be, there will be no more, right?
There
Like
will be
there's,
no more.
yeah,
Abortion will be no more.
yeah,
All of the things that
injustice, oppression,
yes,
sickness.
all of it.
I long for that day. He will make everything right.
Yeah,
Um,
everything will be made new. There'll be no more
yeah,
tears. It's the hope of the end of Revelation, which is Jesus wins. Tears will
yeah,
be no more. So anybody that's listening that is weeping in tears over sin,
mm,
trials, suffering, there is a day. You may not experience it on earth because some trauma, while you're here, you will never fully get over.
yeah,
And that's a reality. That's not meant to be a depressing thought, but some of us are going to deal with stuff the rest of our lives. But there will be a day when we see Jesus where
yeah,
there will be no more tears. There won't need to be any more tears, because he is that perfect, and he makes everything right, and he makes everything new. Like, so you think about justice. There is
mm,
no more perfect justice than in the presence of God. You will
yeah,
not find it anywhere. And so, I just think that's a hope that we have. And that's not a pithy hope. That's not like trust Jesus because one day, like what we talked about at the beginning,
yes,
like,
right, right,
oh, God's got you. Or, praying for you, that's enough, or whatever. However you think about that stuff, that is one of the reasons that's in the Bible, because it causes us to say, Paul says, these light momentary afflictions produce for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And we will never look back at this life and say, it wasn't worth trusting Jesus when we see him face to face. Everything that we go through, it will say, I understand more now why I went through what I did, and it taught me about you. And
yeah,
I trusted you, and here I am. And, everything I went through was worth it because I'm in your presence, and that's enough. I think there's something there that we need to hold on to and grasp. So
yeah.
this is
That
helpful,
is hope.
Vicky. Yes, it gives
Yeah,
us hope, proven hope that will
yeah,
not disappoint us, and we can trust
and not
that.
hope to minimize pain or experience.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but true hope that really does comfort and create a longing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really helpful. This is great. I could talk to you for a long time. You're on this is your second time, and we'll
I
have
know.
you on again.
I'm really getting the hang of this being a guest thing. It's really fun.
I know. Well, it sounds like you're a guest on another podcast too. So,
Yes. Yes.
but we'll help it. Next time we talk, I know both of us bought Darby Strickland's book, Is It
Yes.
Abuse? A Biblical
Is it
Guide to
abuse?
Identifying Domestic Abuse and Helping Victims. I haven't read it yet, neither of you. So we'll read it,
Yeah.
and the next time we'll talk about that book. I heard it's a life changer. A game changer in terms of Christian counseling and how she's part of CCEF, which, if you're not familiar, it's the Center for Christian Education. No,
Christian Counseling
Christian
Education
Counseling
Foundation.
Education Foundation. Yeah, and biblically based, but this book is going to help us, I think. So we'll talk about that next time we get here. Thanks for jumping on with us again.
Thanks, Jason.
Hopefully this is encouraging everybody. Thank you guys for jumping on with us. Thanks for spending some time with us. Looking forward to next time on Outside Our Walls. Have a really good day, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Later. Bye.